It's the start of summer here, and I have two topazes from Mexico. Not sure where in Mexico, but they're faceted, and one is kind of a rusty orange brown, and the other is a fairly light kind of off-white color. And I've heard that topaz from different localities can fade in the sun. These are both from Mexico, and I've heard conflicting reports of whether they actually will fade. And so what I thought I'd do was bring them outside, and I'll leave them out here on our sun-drenched rock wall. And let's see, put them somewhere they'll get lots of sun. This is a south-facing wall, so it'll get our afternoon sun, which we regularly get above 90 degrees in the summer. And I'll come out here and take a photo every day or a few days, depending on when I remember. And I'll show you the results of what happens to these topazes in the sun. Well, it's been about 2 months and a week, and I think we should be ready to call this experiment done. These have been wet almost constantly since I put them out here because it has been an extremely wet and cool spring so far this year, going from April to June. But it has still had some sunny days, and as we can see, these things are, let's see, zoom in here. In this view, that looks almost colorless, although in some angles there's just a slight hint of color. Whereas with this larger one, this guy is pretty much colorless. Let's go inside, take these out of their boxes, and talk about what just happened here. Back in the shop, here we are with our now nearly colorless topaz. Got the big one, and then the small one, which you can kind of tell by comparison has just a very slight peachy color, but it's nothing compared to what these originally were, which these are two stones that I've kept, in the dark basically. They're still very peachy, and here on the right are a couple of raw topaz from the same locality, or same parcel anyway, where there's a little bit of color. A lot of these ones are fairly colorless, but they would cut kind of a light color like that, tannish. These browns and peaches are caused by iron, probably 3+. What happens with topaz, which is an aluminofluorosilicate, which means that its primary structure is aluminum and then silica tetrahedra, but there's also some hydroxyl ions and also some fluorine that substitutes for those hydroxyl ions that make up the structure. And those tetrahedra are in an octahedral arrangement, and some iron in the 3+ state probably replaces the aluminum and causes the reddish, brownish coloration in topaz, whereas for natural blue topaz, it's a minor chromium impurity actually, and those can also cause pink, I think. And so what I believe happens with the UV radiation of the sun is that it creates just enough energy, adds enough energy to the structure, which those irons are in a kind of more or less unstable state. They're called color centers, and it's sort of a defect in the crystal structure. And what happens is the UV radiation excites the iron in the system, and I think maybe allows it to go to a lower excitation state, or sort of destroys that color center and then it goes clear. So maybe this smaller stone that has just a little bit of color has slightly more iron than this lighter clear stone. Normally, the bigger the stone, the deeper the color you would find, kind of like this one here, that's a fairly deep peach color compared to this kind of more shallower, smaller stone. Kind of in reverse, this bigger stone went to a clearer state than the smaller stone, so maybe there was less iron in there. There's more iron in the smaller one by just a little bit. And so there was enough iron left over that can't be accommodated by the crystal structure, and so it remains very slightly tannish. However, I think it is important to point out that this is actually not a super well understood phenomena. I think with the increase in instrumental capabilities, they're starting to understand it better. And there's a general consensus that there's the iron 3+ in perhaps the aluminum state, or the aluminum site in the structure. I found a reference that said that topaz from pegmatite sources are less likely to lose their color than those from hydrothermal sources. And not all topaz fades, so these are probably from a hydrothermal source somewhere in Mexico. And this would be the case for topaz from Mount Antero or the Topaz Mountain in Utah. Those are hydrothermally created topazes, and so those are actually less likely to keep their color in the sun. And so if you have a colored topaz and you don't know where it's from and it's not treated in any way, then you want it to just wear it in the evening. It's an evening stone basically, because if you wear it in the daylight or bright sunshine where it can be exposed to UV radiation, then it's more likely to fade. A permanent way to alter topaz is to irradiate it with neutron or gamma radiation, where with a low amount of radiation you can actually add blue to the color, and that's how you get blue topaz, which is probably the most commonly available color out there for topaz these days. You could get something kind of like this blue. This is actually an iolite. I don't have any blue topaz, but you get a nice blue from the topaz by the excitation of chromium. There may be just a little bit of chromium in here, and if there's enough when it is irradiated, then those chromium kind of take the place of iron in creating color deficits and creating color in the stone. If you only irradiate it a little bit, then that process is also reversible, where a bit of heating will turn it back into a colorless stone. But if you add enough radiation, then that change is permanent, and it will also excite the iron, and so you get kind of a greenish stone almost, where the blue of the chromium and the brown of the iron kind of mix together. And so in order to make the blue from that, you just heat it up a little bit to say 200 or 300 degrees Celsius, and that will remove the brown component, kind of like adding UV radiation to it, and all you're left with is the blue, which that's a pretty cool process. Anyway, I think that'll do it for this topaz experiment. I've dunked them in acid, I've faceted them, I've heated them up. I think we're about done with it, done all we can do, and I think going forward, I'll probably have to expose my other stones to sunlight just to get it out of the way. If you sell something like this, I would be disappointed if you were to buy this and then it would fade into this colorless stone that you weren't expecting. If you really like the color of the original stone, you'd have to care for it very carefully. But if I just get rid of that color immediately, then you don't have to worry about that in the future. And there's enough play with these clear topaz that I think it actually looks pretty nice by itself. There we go. Topaz still has quite a bit of a refractive index, so there's a bit of play of color in there and light. So I think that still looks really nice.